Welcome to the FCC. It's good to see all of you back here, and it's good to see all of your faces unmasked with no social distancing rules, so it's great. The FCC is back. Before I introduce the panel here, we've got a great series of upcoming events, so please take a look at fcchk.org. If you're around on Thursday, I'll be back again. We're hosting a club lunch for the former Foreign Minister of Singapore, Mr. George Yeo. Among other things, we'll be asking him whether or not this question of a Hong Kong-Singapore rivalry is real, and what's the view from Singapore. We've got a club screening coming up on the 23rd. It's a reshowing of the film No Ordinary Life about camera women at CNN, and we've got various other events coming up, so just please keep an eye on everything going on from their website. This is I don't like to use the word anniversary, but we are at least trying to mark the one-year anniversary a few days ago of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which is called in Russia a special military operation. We've got a great panel here to come and discuss where things go from here. First, we're going to have a showing. We're going to do something a little bit different. We're going to show you a video and some photographs by Mr. Alex Chan, who is here with us today. He's been on the field reporting as a freelance photojournalist, since 2019, but also went over to Ukraine just after the war, spent 6 months there, if I'm not mistaken. He's going to talk a little bit about some photos just to set the scene for us. And then we're going to hear from our panelists here. We've got Klara Jakova, who's next to me, who's the Consul General from the Czech Republic, which, if I'm not mistaken, is now called Czechia. Right?
Both names okay.
Yeah, both names are okay. Czechia, the Czech Republic.
Yeah,
We've got Alexander Danda, who you may know from a previous FCC event here on Ukraine. He's the Consul General from Poland. And, of course, our old friend Thomas Noki. He's the head of the EU office, the European Union office for Hong Kong and Macau. In fact, all of our diplomats here represent both Hong Kong and Macau, and they've actually been able to go to Macau without masks or quarantine over the last few days or so. But without further ado, Alex, would you like to start with some showing of the videos? And he's going to talk a little bit about it. I think you've got a microphone on, but you can take the clicker there.
Okay. Technically, I've been as I'm studying in the Hong Kong Bay-Tips University Journalism Department. And during the Ukraine war, actually, I gave up 2 semesters for both Ukraine and 2020 during the Belarus protests to go to cover the Belarus protests and the Ukraine war. So personally, I have a very deep interest of the Eastern Bloc history, cultures, and politics. So now I'm currently work as a freelance photojournalist covering like international news, and I've been cooperating with different medias, as you can see here. And I've been starting to enter the industry from 2019 during the Hong Kong protest, and show a dozen of photos. And also one of the photos have been awarded for the Hong Kong Human Rights Press Award. And yeah, and I go to Belarus in 2020 actually to document the protest against the Alexander Lukashenko, which I covered for another like 4 months. And at the same time, I've been into Ukraine for 6 months from the second week of the war. So I arrived in Warsaw, and then all the way down to the border to Persmil, and then to Lviv, and then all the way from basically west to east, from Lviv to Donbas area, and also the southern region of Mykolaiv. And this is a photo I show for a man who is actually playing his piano, painted with the peace sign. It is taken at the medical border between Ukraine and Poland, which actually this man said actually he's willing to play piano and bring the piano to Ukraine to play for the people. And this is another photo actually taken in Poland, in the medical border, which actually a mother actually picked her son up right after her son arrived from Kyiv, which at that time was bombing quite frequently, I would say. And this is another picture I took in early March, which is actually she's Grandma Yulia. And as you can see photos, I show photos with like people and the relationship between people and the war, rather than military only. And actually, Grandma Julia, she was very lucky because she actually went to the supermarket on that morning when she shopped for groceries when the missile strikes her home, basically. And when she actually go back to her home, she was crying, she was shivering, basically, when she saw her home was basically shattered into pieces and the glass is into pieces, and actually the wall is with cracks on the wall, basically. And this is another photo I took in Lviv, which is the mother cries at the military funeral. His son was killed in the airstrike bombing in the western of Ukraine. As a result, at that time it was as a result of a warning from Russia about the support from the NATO countries, basically. And this is another photo I took in Kharkiv, which is a car is basically destroyed, completely devastated, which is also all the school around there, around 500 meters, is also completely destroyed, I would say. This is one of my friends. She is volunteers to knitting a camouflage at Lviv in the former library, actually. And her boyfriend was just enlisted in the army right before, several days earlier. And this is another photo of my friend. He looks up the sky in the trenches in Donbas area, basically, and at the outskirts of Donetsk on late May, and he was captured by the Russian forces a few days later after this photo was taken, actually, and he was missing in action until now. This is another photo I took in the Kyiv Oblast, which is Borodenka, and actually this was one of the most destroyed places around the Kyiv during the first phase of the war. This teddy bear was blown from the ruins of the building, this is like a 12 floors tall building, I would say. And this is another photo I took for which a mother is actually evacuating her son and herself from the city of Bakhmut, which is now sieged by the Russian forces. At that time, they haven't had any electricity, water, gas supply for at least 2 months already. And this is another photo of Lumilia and grandfather Igor. They were holding their grandchildren, which is only 7 days old. The name is Hope, actually. And they were born in the basement during a shelling in Sloviansk Donbas. And this is, and during my reportage in Kharkiv, at that time it was still under siege, so most of the people, they decided to live in the basement, live in the metro, not the basement, because the basement is they haven't been in any electricity, water. A lot of people decide to live their life for months there. And this is Lumilia, Grandma Lumilia, and actually she was just evacuating from Donbas area that morning when her home was destroyed. Her barely sees because one of her eyes blinded years ago, and then he barely walks anymore. So this is another photo I took in Bakhmut, which is a town is under heavy strike now, and these two elderly. They cannot walk anymore. They have walking disabilities, and they were placed in a luggage space because there's not enough space for the emergency evacuation for civilians. And this was taken at the late May. And this is a husband and wife, which is Sergei and Lumilia. This is actually a missile that is not explosive yet, and they having 2 jobs at that time, but they were lost. They both lost their job since the 2014 when Russia annexed Crimea and the Donbas area. So surrounding their home is basically unexplosive mine and explosive missiles. So even they want to farm, it is impossible for them to actually start a new life, I would say. This is another photo I take in Lviv, which is a girl farewells her boyfriend, who is just enlisted in the army. And his hand was actually injured during the training. And the boy is actually a software engineer before the war. So this is another photo taken in Dnipro, which is now they lie thousands of Ukrainian soldiers there. And actually, this is Yulia and her husband Vova. They have been living in the underground basement for several months during the first phase of the war. And their town have been occupied by the Russian forces at least 3 weeks. And then they rely on marinated cucumbers and then rotten bread with the only food source. And then he said, we heard gunshots outside as the Russian soldiers passed by, and we hide in basement pretending we are not here, otherwise we'll be shot. And this is taken in Lugansk region, which is, as I know, I lost some context of these children. They are now all under Russian controlled territory. They are living in a basement without any electricity, without education, of course, without water, gas supply. And then after this photo was taken, after like 5 days this photo was taken, the city of Severodonetsk was taken by Russian forces. And I lost some of the contacts. I lost contact from them. And another story is after this photo was taken, the right-hand side, the most right-hand side's father was actually died the next day this photo was taken by stepping on a mine. This is actually a video during my reportage in Donbas, which is actually, I would say, is the Russian forces basically shelled the whole area without hesitation, I would say. Can I show this? I will just play a little bit of the video.
Ми позавчора за 20 хвилин втратили 2 колеса і одне прямо тут на мосту.
А я втратив 2 машини. Люди виїжджали.
Було один.
Третій, там ще хуже.
Ага.
Шахід, я
Situation
лемка.
another bridge.
Окей. Все хорошо. Сука. Окей.
Рука, не трогай руку. Не трогай руку. Не трогай руку. Don't. Сука.
Окей.
Сука. Не трогай руку.
Everyone. 내려온다.
Та.
Hey, Kola. How are you? Kola, how are you?
Сука.
Your leg.
Don't.
Okay.
No, take my.
Okay.
Actually, in this incident, actually we were not in the direct line of Russian forces at the time. But later I heard from Ukrainian soldiers that actually there have been people reporting like accurate position of every individual walking in this area. So my friend, I lost by hearing on my left ear for a month, and then I still have sometimes have the hearing issues on my left ear. And my friend Mikola, he was very lucky that his sharp nose go like passes his body, and then still stuck in his back, I would say. But he was very lucky that the shrapnel doesn't break any vital organs, and he's been able to recover within 1 year, I think so. And so, another story I want to share about is that actually I take these photos in Kharkiv. And it's very interesting because Kharkiv is a Russian-speaking city in Ukraine. And they are living in the Sovivka area, and which these babushkas, these grandmas, actually are all ethical Russians. So they are all Russians, they are born in Moscow, they are born in Russia. But at the same time, they were born by the Russian forces every day. So they, ironically speaking, like we got liberated by the artillery every day because we are Russian speakers. And until today, they are still living without any electricity, any water supply. And they have very different opinions towards Ukraine and the 2014 protests. They're very supportive of Putin before the war, actually. And to them, it's like completely different. And they say, like, for Ukraine, we no longer only need peace, we need like victory for Ukraine. Otherwise, we are keep shelled every day. So this is my contact. I will like.
Thank you so much for that, Alex. Please, let me ask you, please, give him a round of applause for that. And before I let you off the hook, one question. You're going back?
I'm going back in June, early June, because I'm still actually need to finish my studies in the university. So.
Okay. Well, good luck going back. Stay safe. Let's start with our panel here to discuss. Thank you so much for that. But I want to get some analysis from our panel here. And Thomas Noki, EU head, let me start with you, and I'll just ask you a question. I mean, at the moment, it appears to be somewhat of a stalemate. I mean, either side is moving a few yards each day. It's like trench warfare almost World War I style. Massive casualties. And I'll just, during the American invasion of Iraq in 2003, General David Petraeus, who was skeptical, asked the question that became kind of a famous question, and I'll ask the same of you. Tell me how this ends.
Okay, thank you, Keith, and thanks for having me on this panel. I would first of all like to pay tribute to the work of Alex and to your bravery, as we've seen. We were very happy to be able to partner with you in the event we had at the EU office to mark the 1-year anniversary, which we did on Friday the 24th. For us, it's very important to continue raising awareness all around the world about what's happening in Ukraine. So thank you, Alex, for hosting the exhibition in our office and also for being here today. How does this end? I mean, I think I wish we knew how this ends, but unfortunately, this situation has been going on for over a year now. But for the EU, it's clear that we need to support Ukraine in this to confront this illegal invasion, this aggressive invasion of its sovereign territory through different means, through economic support, through humanitarian support, through also military assistance. This is clear to us because the proposals that have been on the table in terms of either ceasefire or negotiations have been rejected by the Russian side, and on our side we would support any proposal that the Ukraine would come forward with. In fact, we supported their proposal that came out in the autumn last year, but this was rejected by the Russian side. So in the absence of any sort of process, we have to support Ukraine. There's no alternative. And in fact, in terms of international law, supporting a sovereign country to defend itself is fully in line with international law. So this is what the EU is doing.
Let's go down the line here just for a moment. Alexander Dunda from Poland. Tell me, the Ukrainians keep asking for more and more weapons. The West hesitates for a while. Poland says we'll give it to them, then eventually they get it. If we keep feeding weapons in and the Russians don't seem to be backing down yet, tell me how this ends.
So again, we are with the same question here, is how it ends. Well, let me quote Bertrand Russell in here: wars do not determine who's right, only who's left. Yes. So for now, it seems that we know that Ukraine will be left for sure. Yes. I don't know about Russia. I mean, I know that Russia will be left, but what kind of Russia? Yes, that is also the question which we are starting to ask ourselves. We know more or less what kind of Ukraine will be left after the war. Yes, both politically speaking, but also economically speaking. Yes, they will need our help. They will need our political help. So that's also why it is good to hear that the EU is voicing its support for the Ukraine, also with the accession to the EU ranks. And also, as far as it is concerned, economically, the reconstruction process for Ukraine will be badly needed. Of course, before all of that can happen, before all of that can get traction, there needs to be some military solution. And this kind of military solution is going to be determined probably this year. Unfortunately, it's going to get much worse before it gets better, militarily speaking and casualties speaking. So for now, it is what it is. We have got still refugees in our respective countries, and we have got support being flown into Ukraine, both humanitarian but also military one. You've mentioned the tanks. Well, tanks were only one of the topics as far as the military support is concerned. It is true that we were the first to offer the tanks, the new generation of tanks, yes, the Leopard 2 tanks, but eventually all the other countries who voiced their support, they came around, and we are really glad that we are not alone with this kind of offer. So the position of my government is that we are going to give the support, all kind of support, humanitarian, material, financial, and military, as long as it takes.
Fighter jets?
Well, we've been discussing that. You remember when I went to your class, it was March last year. So if this is going to be a concerted discussion and it will end with the conclusion in the NATO countries, then yes. Yes, I think it's going to also take the fighter jets.
Clara, thank you so much for joining this group. You've got a new president in the Czech Republic, in Czechia. From Prague, how do you want this to end? How do you see this ending?
Yeah, same question again. Yes, we have a new president. Our position is, of course, in line with the EU one. There is no change, and I think one of the aspects that was not mentioned is the accountability for the war. So it's not only about whatever happened, and it all needs to be investigated, and there are procedures already, but it's also about the aggression itself. So our government supports the special tribunal to actually deal with the aggression. So whatever it ends, this needs to be part of the ending. So definitely the accountability for the war. So I think this is one of the aspects that we put a lot of emphasis. And yeah, we believe that resolute action, including the military one, is the answer at this point. I think we've seen a lot of trials of, discussing, or many people are talking to potential partners that could actually help end, including China, and it goes nowhere. We saw the Chinese proposal. There is no movement so far. So we believe that, the military, the unity and the military might is the answer.
Do you think pushing for accountability hampers a peace deal? If the Russians or Russian leaders think they might be called into the international court somewhere aren't they going to be less likely to want to sign any deal?
Of course, they might be, but I think they also must understand from the history that this is going to happen anyway. So it's just about whether there will be consensus on the aggression part, on the special tribunal, which of course it's not decided yet, but we are very much for that.
I'll ask a few questions, and please, anybody jump in. Thomas, let me pose it to you, but please, anybody jump in. Question. The big surprise is that Europe survived the cold winter without too much problem on the energy front, but Russia survived the sanctions without too much problem. Their economy is probably going to shrink less than the UK economy at the moment. What went wrong?
Okay. Well, I think you're right that the impact on the energy prices, we've seen this. They're now coming back down to where they were over a year ago. The dependence on Russian gas, which was very high, 40% before the war. Now gas is under 10%. Oil is 0. So from that perspective, nothing went wrong. This is working out. And there weren't any problems with, well, there were high gas prices at some point, but as I said, these came down. I wouldn't underestimate the impact also that the sanctions are having, and that will have in the long term on the Russian economy. In terms of the imports, these have come way down in terms of especially the technological imports, which Russia needs. The Russian economy declined, contracted last year. So they're having an impact, these sanctions, for sure. Russia is I think economically and technologically isolated, and as I said, there will be a long-term effect of the sanctions as well.
You two agree, Alexander?
Well, by all means, as far as the winter is concerned, the winter was also quite gracious to us in Europe this year, I would say. And also, you know, just like with the oil crisis in the 1970s, the demand for oil, the demand for gas has diminished in Europe. And it also sparked the political thinking into finding some new sources of energy, which is, well, meaning basically new sources of traditional energy as oil and gas. For us, it's more oil being transported from Norway, for example, but also from outside of Europe, like Qatar, like the US as well. And also seriously thinking about going into renewables, which has been basically a no topic in Poland for a number of decades. Yes, so I think that this military conflict in Ukraine, it has got also the effect on the way that the renewable energy is being perceived in those parts of Europe who are, as of even recently, shying away from it.
And Clara, let me ask it this way, another way. I mean, the governments of Europe seem united in supporting Ukraine. What about the people? Are people starting to say, hey, maybe we should, you know, get out of this, or maybe we're giving them a blank check, or maybe we should get a peace deal because so many people are being killed? I mean, what's...
Actually, it's amazing the level of support among public in Czechia, but I think it's all over the Europe. They are actually giving money even for the military. There are crowdfunding projects, and I don't think it's being lowered down. On the opposite, I think they are strongly behind the governments, and yeah, they are actually helping. And of course, our governments are talking to them. You know, the energy crisis. Please use less energy, and I think it's also working. So I think the level of, you know, basically support for the whatever our governments are doing in terms of support for the Ukraine government, I think it's working.
Alexander, let me ask you, because you're a frontline country, so to speak. I mean, refugees coming in. I mean, are they basically going to become a permanent fixture now? And how's the population dealing with that?
Well, it seems like it. And what Claire was saying just now is also true as far as the situation with refugees is concerned. I mean, in Poland right now we have got 1.5 million Ukrainian refugees who are registered with Polish authorities. They have got Polish identification number, PESEL number, which allows them to use all the social support on the regular basis, just as they were Polish citizens. They can use medical care for free. The children can make the use of Polish education system. And it's been 1 year so far, and so far no political fuel out of it. And we have got elections, very important elections this autumn. So you have to also remember that the tensions, political tensions in Poland are rising, but definitely not because of the refugees. There are different topics being discussed, but not even a single serious political force is voicing refugees as a real problem, which needs to be a part of the political discussion in the upcoming elections.
Czechia, do you have refugees there?
Yes, sure. For us, it's more than 400,000, almost 500,000.
You're a small country, too.
And they are working. I think it's more than 160, usually women. And yeah, we also have many kids at schools. I think it's like 30,000 at the grammar schools level. Yeah, and again, level of support and sympathy across the board, you know, be it companies, you know, supporting or educational institutions. It's just amazing.
So no refugee fatigue in Europe yet?
Not.
Thomas, you see that? No refugee fatigue yet?
No fatigue, and there have been across the European Union, 17 billion euros spent on Ukrainian refugees. And there's been a mechanism which has been activated because refugees normally you have to go through an individual screening process, but there was let's say a group decision that determined that all Ukrainians fleeing the war would actually be granted refugee status and asylum. So that was actually very helpful in order to get them to be able to study, to work, and to live normally in EU countries. So that was also an important decision when this was taken at the beginning of the war.
Last question for me, then I want to get your questions as well. I'll pose it first to Alexander. I'll pose it first to Thomas. Anybody else who wants to jump in. Why is it in this part of the world, I hear people saying to me from various countries that, well, Russia has legitimate security concerns, that NATO was expanding. They don't want to take sides. And I hear that, and again, maybe everybody here agrees that it was an invasion, but I'm not hearing that so much in Asia. They just had the G20 meeting in India. They couldn't come up with a consensus because so many people thought, well, there are two sides to the story. I mean, why is that? Why is the message not getting out that this, which the West is trying to send, that this is an existential crisis for democracy or for small countries that don't want to be invaded by big countries? Why is that message not getting out?
Well, I think you're right. You hear this sort of narrative in different parts of the world. I think in general, if you look at the what happened in the General Assembly, with 141 countries, an overwhelming majority, actually in favor of the Ukraine resolution. That also speaks volumes as to the support there is for Ukraine around the world, and not just in Europe, and with, let's say, like-minded countries. But there is a lot of disinformation going around that it was NATO aggressiveness which was behind this, and a lot of it is down to, I think, Russian propaganda, which unfortunately then gets propagated by other countries, and so this is also very damaging because and one of these is exactly that NATO was aggressive. When you look at I don't represent NATO, but when you look at the situation on the ground, Russia has troops in 3 of its neighboring countries, and in all 3 of those countries, the government is not with the permission of the government. So who is being aggressive in this case.
I'll ask you, Alexander, and also Clara, because your countries joined NATO, and Russians seem to point to that to say they're being encircled. I mean, Alexander, you're a professor of international relations when you're not a diplomat, correct? I mean, how do you explain this, the reason that other countries around the world, many of whom were colonized in the past, don't see this as a threat?
Well, as you mentioned, we joined NATO in 1999. It wasn't an easy decision for NATO, and it wasn't an easy decision for Poland as well. I remember when I was growing up, there were ideas in Poland being flown after the Soviet army was taken away from Poland, because we did have Soviet army stationed in Poland for a couple of decades. So after they were removed, there were ideas of forming something which was called NATO bis, yes, some sort of Central European alliance, which would be like a buffer zone between the post-Soviet world and the Western world. But eventually we decided that our strategic aim is to join the Western alliances, both NATO and the EU. Yes, so we decided on that path, but it wasn't accepted right away. 1994, Partnership for Peace. This was the waiting line for not only for Poland, but for Czech Republic as well, for Slovakia, for Hungary. And then only in 1999 we were accepted. So this was not us knocking on the door and being let in all the way immediately. It was a concerted decision and well thought through decision by the NATO members of then. Yeah, I would say that there was the time when Russia could voice their opinions as opposed to this part of Europe joining the NATO. They did not. There was a regular dialogue between NATO and Russia. There was also the platform, Russia, NATO, Council, and those questions were being discussed, but not to the point where there would be the return to the geopolitical, talking about the spheres of influence again in Europe.
Clara, you worked on South and Southeast Asia before in the past. I mean, you know those countries. Why do you think they're not more vocal in their opposition to this invasion?
I think if in South and Southeast Asia, Singapore is a good example, because they are the most vocal, right? And they are in not necessarily in the Western camp, but definitely most courageous ones. And I think it's given the closeness of the threat as well, in theory, because they are a small state, and potentially in the future they could be, if territorial integrity is in question, they could be the ones. But I wanted to say that maybe we should go back to basics in general, and I think the lack of understanding here in Asia is maybe because of the lack of knowledge. I know that our embassy in Philippines were telling us that Russians were extremely popular in Philippines, and that they don't understand what's happening currently. And I was working as a Russia desk before, and I still remember that when there was this Medvedev doctrine way back before South Ossetia and Abkhazia, our people at the embassy were already raising, flags. We should be worried about this, because then, whoever is in danger from Russians abroad, they could be saved in the future. And it happened in South Ossetia, Abkhazia, then Crimea. And I think we should be explaining here in Asia that it's really about territorial integrity. Nobody was taking anything away from Russia. It's the other way around. And it started in 2008 or 2009 already. So I think this needs to be remembered.
Thank you for that. Questions here from the audience? We've got a little bit of time. Yes, right here. And then over here. Yes, here first. Is there a microphone? And then Austin second.
Hi, Tony Watson from Far East Investment Management. I guess this might be more for Thomas, but anybody else who wants to join in. Why do we not hear more of a pushback on the Russian narrative that somehow NATO is an evangelizing organization that goes around recruiting countries, but rather that it is a voluntary defensive organization where even if you do apply and meet standards, as we're seeing with Finland and Sweden, you do not necessarily get in. quite often in conversations I've had, the whole conversation gets shut down when I do point that out. But, you know, I'm not hearing it from the NATO side, the EU side, certainly.
Thomas, you're not a NATO spokesman, I know, but
Yeah, I don't rep, but I think this is being, I do hear it. Maybe you're right, not enough. Maybe our voices aren't heard enough in certain countries. As I said before, Russian disinformation does go a long way. So the narrative you hear is more the other one, which, as I said, is not the correct one. 6% of Russia's land border is with NATO countries. Now, what Putin did was, I don't know what the actual percentage will be when Finland joins, but it's quite a lot more than 6% after they will join. So I think it's important to repeat this. As I said, I'm not a NATO spokesperson, but often the reasons why the interests of not only Ukraine but a number of countries which have association agreements with the EU, and Moldova is also one of them, and is also, like Ukraine, now a candidate for EU membership. And this is, for us, we see their legitimate aspirations, whether it's in terms of their economic future, being part of the single market of the EU. That's what the association agreement does. One day when they join, whenever that will be, they'll be part of the internal market. So there's an economic side, there's a political side, but there's also a security side, which is brought by NATO. And these countries have legitimate aspirations, which it's for them to decide. And I think that's the main thing, the accent that we put. It's for these countries to decide their own future. We're not forcing either EU membership or NATO membership or any of this. It should be their choice to do this or not, and that choice should be respected. This is a fundamental point we're trying to put across.
thank you. Austin?
Hi, Austin Ramsey, Wall Street Journal. I want to ask about China, as we're in China, and its complicated relationship with Russia and the war in Ukraine. About 2 weeks ago, China released a position paper on the war. In advance, it was described by some as a peace plan. But I want to ask what your thoughts are on what China has proposed, if that's helpful to bringing an end to the war. And then additionally, on the question of weapons, the US government has said recently it believes that China is at least considering providing weapons to Russia, which would, of course, dramatically change the conflict. It also said it has seen no evidence that that's happened. But we know there are companies that have been sanctioned for providing dual-use technology, including at least one company in Hong Kong. So I just wanted to ask what your thoughts are on that as well. And this is a question open to anyone who wants to take it on.
Who wants to talk about China first? Alexander.
Well, I would say that as far as the question of supplying weapons to Russia is concerned, we can see right now what is happening concerning Iran and the drones. Yes, I mean, Iran already is in a position which is placing itself under the different kinds of embargoes, different kind of repercussions from the West mostly, but from international community at large. I'm not representing the country which has got a big economic clout as far as the contacts with China is concerned. Yes, probably it would be better if my German colleague or the French colleague was here to answer your question. What will happen economically once the news breaks that China is supplying weapons to Russia? But I think that this might be the tipping point in the future relations between Europe, the European Union, and China. Because as of now, we are constantly asking for China not to do that. We are constantly trying to encourage China to keep its position of non-alignment, although we know that this non-alignment is more aligning towards Russian side. But that is what we are trying to do diplomatically until today.
Yes, Thomas.
On China and the paper, I think the problem starts with the title of the paper. If you see the title, it says it talks about the position of China on the crisis. So they don't even acknowledge that this is a war. What with the photos we've seen before clearly show that there's an active war. For us, it's an enumeration of different principles, which many of which are well known. They didn't come out with this position paper. Many of these positions we would actually agree with, but there are some which are problematic, and I would say probably the focus on the legitimate security interests, which points to the narrative we were talking about earlier. I think that's probably the more problematic part of that paper. The other factor is the fact that it's not clear reading the paper. It's not clear who the aggressor is and who's the aggressed. Everything is finely balanced, and there's no language which clearly states that there is a sovereign state that's been invaded and whose territorial integrity has been violated. So this for us is probably the problematic part of that paper, which, as I said, is not in a way not really a peace plan. It's more a list of different principles which China is following.
Just to add to what Tom has been saying right now, well, this paper is basically showing China's position on trying to earn its place by the table as the mediator. But in order to be a mediator, you need to be accepted by both conflicted sides equally. And by using that kind of language, I think China is trying to do that. Although the action itself, political action so far, clearly indicates that it's more inclined to one side of the conflict. By the way, this position paper has not been accepted by the Ukrainian authorities as the viable one. Yes, so we can see that China right now, although it tries to position itself in the role of the mediator, it is clearly not accepted, at least by one side, in that role. I would say that Turkey is definitely more in that position in the future. If any future peace talks happen, if they happen right now, it would be definitely more conceivable to see Turkey in that role than China.
And maybe just
yes, please.
Background is also important. If this paper comes out at the time where there is already talk about Xi going to Moscow, right, and no single word about potentially contacting Ukrainian side, I think it's also saying a lot. And also, going back to basics, as I was saying, it's all about the point one, right, territorial integrity. And I think it was the US position that they said it should stop after the point one. And I think this confirms the idea of we should really be talking about the basics, the territorial integrity.
Okay. I think we got time for one more question over here.
Thank you very much, and thank you to all the guests and the speakers. My name is Keith Moody. I'm an independent branding consultant, so I'm maybe a bit kind of random in terms of audience, but serious question. In terms of where things are headed and what the shape of the world might look like after this conflict is resolved, hopefully, sooner rather than later, do any of the panel seem to see a re-emergence of blocks, geopolitical military blocks, that characterize the post-World War II world?
Well, I would say that such a bloc exists on the side of the West. Yes, we have got NATO alliance, yes, which is firmly supporting Ukraine in this conflict. As for the Eastern bloc, yes, well, I would say that there is no attraction force to Russia right now. We're talking today in here about different countries who do not voice their condemnation of what has Russia done, but they do not voice their appraisal for what Russia is doing either, yes? So we need to remember that. It is either because they have got economic incentive not to voice their condemnation or some other reasons, but definitely it is not the soft power of Russia which is attracting different countries from around the world to join the, whatever we can call this bloc on the eastern side.
I think we squeeze in one last question.
Just very quickly, first of all, thank you, especially to all of your countries, for all you've done for the Ukrainian refugees. It's really inspiring. As you said at the beginning, what Russia's done is illegal. The lady mentioned there's consequences like a tribunal for aggression. Do you see another outcome is reparations from Russia to compensate those taxpayers for all they've incurred this past 12 months?
Who wants to take that on? Reparations. Clara?
Yeah, I think reparations are on the table. The Russian, whatever they have abroad, I think a lot of it was freezed in different forms, and I think the discussion is definitely how to use it, and I think it will be interlinked with the outcome of the international court or tribunal, and I think this is where the money should be, definitely, to go into reconstruction.
Okay, last question for me, and whoever wants to answer it, I'm looking at you, Thomas, but an eventual peace deal, whenever we get there, could it possibly be Russia gets to keep Crimea, they get to keep certain parts of the Donbas, in exchange, NATO gives security guarantees to Ukraine, and they can join the EU. Is that the deal we're looking at?
Okay. Early on in our careers, we're taught to not answer hypothetical questions. No, what I'll say is that there are internationally recognized borders of Ukraine, and this is the Ukraine that we recognize, and what I also said earlier is that we support Ukraine. Ukraine is an associate country, now a candidate country for EU membership, and it is up to Ukraine to decide what kind of the acceptable outcome of this of all of this would be, and then the EU will work with Ukraine in ensuring a good outcome to the situation. So I'm not going to get into the Crimea or not Crimea, that situation, but we will work closely with what is now a candidate country in trying to get out of this situation as soon as possible.
Anybody else want? Is land for peace what we're looking at here?
Poland has been especially touched by the change of borders after World War II. Yeah? We're basically ripped off from the east and more towards the west of Europe. So we know that this kind of change takes more than half a century to actually settle down with the population, with the culture, with the way of thinking about your own country, your own place. And that is definitely why we are, just like Thomas said, we are not going to force Ukrainians into choosing any such action. And we are going to stand with them until they decide that it is time to have a talk and to settle down.
Would you like the last word?
Similar historical experience. That's why I think we are in the front of support to Ukrainians. Maybe just last word on, because we had Alex here, how important journalism is to bringing all the pictures, from the front. Never mind how First World War it looks, which is horrifying, but yeah, just to command whatever journalists are doing and bringing whatever is happening there to us.
Well, thank you very much, Klara Jakova from Czechia, Consul General here, Alexander Danda, Thomas Noki from EU Council Head here, and a special thanks here to our brave journalist friend here, Alex Chan, who's going back in there again. So please stay safe. And thank you all for coming. Before I go, I do have a gift for each of you. I must say that the FCC colors are officially blue and yellow, so we're not making a political statement here. Those have long been our traditional colors here. But thank you all for coming, and I'll see you all at the next events.
Thanks, Keith.